Depression is a serious problem for many people. Everybody gets sad at times, and depression is a natural response to devastating and painful events in our life, like the death of a loved one or the breakup of a marriage. It's when depression begins to interfere with our lives that it becomes a problem which ought to be dealt with. This video will teach you about depression, what it is, how it is treated, and most importantly, what you can do about it. Let's go to the whiteboard to learn a little more about depression.
It might surprise you to learn that almost 25% of all Americans suffer from some form of depression. Chances are that some of your friends, coworkers, and family members suffer from clinical depression. Maybe you also suffer from depression. If so, it's important to realize that it's entirely possible to successfully treat most depression. So, what are some of the symptoms of depression? Well, profound feelings of sadness or just feeling empty, feeling hopeless, anxious, guilty, overwhelmed, loss of interest in favorite activities, feeling tired, fatigued, or exhausted, not being able to sleep or sleeping too much, overeating or not wanting to eat at all, wanting to socially isolate and not be around other people, feeling irritable, and thoughts of suicide.
My depression was pretty bad. There were a lot of mornings where I didn't even feel like getting out of bed. What was the point? Everything seemed pretty hopeless, and I just couldn't seem to get myself motivated at all. Different friends would try to cheer me up, but honestly, I really didn't want to be around people at all. I started shutting myself off from everybody. This was a pretty bleak time in my life.
There can be any number of causes for depression. Some of the more common causes for depression are life events. Maybe you've lost your job, maybe you've suffered the breakup of a marriage, or maybe some devastating event has happened in your life recently. Grief, losing a loved one, often entails going through some form of depression. Stress. Sometimes life just becomes way too hectic and overwhelming, and this type of stress can trigger depression. Genetics. Some people are more likely to suffer from depression simply because of their genetic makeup. If your parents or other family members suffer from depression, the odds are greater that you will also experience depression. Early childhood trauma. Being abused as a child in any way, sexually, physically, or verbally, will often lead to depression later in life. Negative thinking patterns. Sometimes the ways in which we think can cause us to be more likely to be depressed. Sometimes low self-esteem can be a culprit.
I just felt empty all the time. I felt like I was worthless and that my life was really never going to get any better. And I didn't like me very much. And I felt like if anyone really knew me, they wouldn't like me either.
Several medical conditions can also trigger depression, and depression is quite often a side effect of certain types of medications which are used to treat a medical problem. Abusing alcohol and other drugs often leads to depression. Not all depression is the same. There are actually quite a few different types of depression. For this presentation, we'll discuss 4 different types: major depressive disorder, seasonal affective disorder or SAD, dystemic disorder, and bipolar disorder. Major depressive disorder or major depression is characterized by one or more severe depressive episodes which last 2 weeks or more. Sometimes a person will only have a single depressive episode during their lifetime, but it's more likely to be a recurring thing. Seasonal affective disorder is actually a subset of major depressive disorder. Seasonal affective disorder, or SAD, is characterized by the onset of depression during the winter months when there is less sunlight. SAD normally lifts during the spring and summer months. Dystemic disorder, or dysthymia, is a less intense form of depression which is often triggered by life events or life situations. You may develop dystemic depression as a result of the death of a loved one, a divorce, losing a job, or suffering a severe disappointment in your life. While dystemic depression is less severe than major depressive disorder, it tends to last longer. Dystemic depression lasts at least 2 years and maybe longer. Dysthymia is characterized by just a lack of pleasure in life. While dysthymia is usually less intense and severe than major depressive disorder, it can still seriously impact your life in a negative way. Dysthymia disorder slowly wears you down over time and robs you of your happiness. Bipolar disorder is a type of mood disorder which is characterized by swinging from depressive lows to manic highs. We all have mood swings from time to time, but people with bipolar disorder swing from one extreme to another. During a manic episode, an individual might experience euphoric giddiness, excitement, difficulty sleeping, talkativeness, and feelings of extreme goodwill. During the depressive episode, an individual with bipolar disorder will experience severe depression, which is similar to major depressive disorder.
Obviously, depression should not be left untreated. Your life can be so much better by addressing your depression and treating it. Let's find out how.
Fortunately, most types of depression can be successfully treated. There are several options for treating depression, such as medicine, therapy, learning new ways to think, lifestyle changes, and self-help techniques. Since everybody is different, no single treatment strategy works for everybody. You may respond well to one of these treatment methods or to a combination of these treatment methods. It sometimes takes a little bit of experimentation to find what works best for you. Let's take a look at the medical treatment for depression. One of the more common forms of antidepressant medication is the selective serotonin reuptake inhibitors family of drugs, commonly known as SSRIs. SSRIs work by increasing the amount of serotonin in the brain. Serotonin is a neurotransmitter which is believed to cause feelings of well-being and happiness. SSRIs slow down the reuptake process when serotonin is released. Some of the more commonly prescribed types of SSRIs are Celexa, Lexapro, Prozac, Paxil, and Zoloft. For various reasons, some people are not able to be prescribed SSRIs, or SSRIs are simply not the best choice for those specific people. Other types of antidepressants are used if this is the case. These include tricyclic antidepressants, monoamine oxidase inhibitors or MAO inhibitors, bupropion, mirtazapine, and trazodone. Therapy is also an excellent way to treat depression. Just as there are many different types of medications available, there are also many therapeutic approaches which can help a person to address the underlying causes for their depression and to learn ways to cope with life that lessen the symptoms of depression. A good depression therapist will be able to work with you to develop a therapeutic plan for treating your depression. A therapist can help you identify and resolve emotional pain from the past, which might be a reason for your depression. A therapist can also help you to identify areas in your life which are overly stressful. Depression sometimes happens when a person has too much stress in their life and it's overwhelming them. Often, depression is caused by or intensified by the ways in which we think. People who suffer from depression tend to ruminate or brood over negative thoughts. A good therapist can help you identify the negative thought patterns that cause or add to your depression and teach you how to retrain your brain to think in more positive ways. Making lifestyle changes is also something which can dramatically help to alleviate your depression. It's been found that getting more exercise, more sunshine, having fun, and eating better all have serious benefits.
Seeking help from your doctor or another professional is always a wise choice. Your doctor may be able to treat your depression through medication, and therapy can also help. Even if your doctor prescribes medication for your depression, it can be very helpful to supplement this with coping skills. One skill which has shown amazing results is to change how you think. Let's go back to the whiteboard to learn how this is done.
Here's a little secret. If you want to change the way you feel, you need to change the way that you think. The truth is that the ways in which we think very much influence how we feel. Our thoughts, our feelings, and our behaviors are all very much tied into one another and interconnected. If we change any one of these three components, we will probably see a change in the other two. You cannot separate how you feel from how you think, or how you think from how you feel, or how you feel from how you behave. If you change one, the others will change as well. That being the case, if you want to change how you feel, you have to change how you think. What do I mean by changing your thinking? Well, let me ask you this. If you have two people, and one of those people is an optimist and always tends to look at the bright side of things, while the other is a pessimist and always tends to look at the bad side of things, which of these two people is more likely to suffer from depression? Obviously, the pessimist is the more likely of the two to be depressed. There's no difference at all between the optimist and the pessimist except how they have trained themselves to think. The optimist has trained himself to focus on the positive, and the pessimist has trained himself to focus on the negative. When we focus on the negative, we become depressed. One aspect of depressed thinking is that we tend to ruminate or dwell on negative thoughts. We turn these thoughts over and over and over in our heads, replaying memories and scenarios endlessly, looking at every single aspect of a negative situation and generally brooding over the negative aspects of our life. Brooding over negative thoughts and memories can lead to depression, and once we're depressed, brooding and ruminating can keep us depressed. As we turn our thoughts inward and focus on the negative and the sad and the painful, we begin to feel negative and sad and full of pain. I'm sure you've heard before that you are what you eat. There's another saying which is equally as true. You feel what you think. So how do you break the rumination habit? Well, the first step is to become aware of what you're thinking. This takes a little bit of practice to begin monitoring yourself and your thinking throughout the day. The next step is to begin learning how to redirect your thinking. Once you become aware of your negative thinking, it's important to break yourself out of the brooding behavior. You can do this by intentionally focusing on something more positive. picking up a telephone and calling somebody, starting a conversation with someone, or finding an activity to engage in that will hold your attention. The important thing is that you interrupt the negative thought process and redirect your attention to something more positive. As we grow up and mature into adults, we sometimes learn how to think in somewhat distorted and irrational ways. Sometimes we acquire irrational beliefs which distort our thinking. For example, we sometimes develop unrealistic expectations about ourselves or about others. If I begin to think that I must always do everything perfectly and never make any mistakes, what happens when I do make a mistake? I become very disappointed in myself. And if I begin to dwell upon how disappointed I am, I might end up making myself depressed. What leads to that in the first place? Well, it was a belief that I formed about myself that I must never fail. That's kind of an extreme belief, isn't it? After all, I'm human and I'm going to fail at certain things. If I hold on to a belief that I must never fail, I'm going to be continuously disappointed in myself and probably become depressed. What if, on the other hand, I'm able to modify that belief? Maybe instead of believing that I must never fail, I can moderate that belief to something a little less extreme, like I would prefer to not fail, but if I do fail, it's not the end of the world. Now, instead of becoming depressed when I fail, I become sad and disappointed, but not depressed. If I can find a way to moderate my thinking, I can also moderate my emotions. Instead of having extreme thoughts which lead to extreme emotions, like depression, I try to have moderate and realistic thoughts which lead to more moderate and manageable emotional responses.
I found that I had to retrain my brain to stop thinking in such negative ways. Instead of dwelling on what was wrong, I began focusing on what was right. As I continued doing this, I noticed I wouldn't get depressed as often. And when I would get depressed, it wasn't nearly as severe as it used to be.
A classic example of focusing on the positive instead of the negative is the way in which we choose to view ourselves and our value. This is sometimes called self-esteem, and it's very much influenced by whether we focus on the positive or focus on the negative. If I dwell on what's wrong with me, I'll probably end up with really low self-esteem. If, on the other hand, I dwell on what's right about me, I'll probably end up with really good self-esteem. This doesn't mean that I have to delude myself about my shortcomings. I'm aware that there are things about me which I don't necessarily like and would like to change, but I don't focus on those things. Instead, I place my focus on what I like about myself. If I do that, I end up with better self-esteem and I'm less likely to become depressed.
I really had to change the way I was thinking. Instead of focusing on what I didn't like about me, I began forcing myself to focus on what I did like about me. And the more I did that, the more I noticed I began to like myself, and my depression became less severe.
It's important to begin looking for ways in which you think in these negative thought patterns.
It's truly amazing how changing the way we think can dramatically change the way we feel. In addition to changing your thinking, there are several practical tips which you can use to cope with your depression. Here are 5 tips. Self-help tip number 1. Start small.
The funny thing about depression is that it doesn't want us to do any of the things that will actually help to alleviate our depression. There are a lot of things we can do, like exercise, visiting with friends, or taking part in some recreational activity that you enjoy. The problem is that our depression doesn't really want us to do any of these things, and when we think about doing something, it just seems so overwhelming that we end up not doing anything. The key here is to start small. The thought of getting out of bed, taking a shower, getting in the car, and going to a friend's house might seem way too overwhelming to us, so we don't even get out of bed. Maybe getting out of bed and taking a shower and getting in the car is too much for you at this point in time. If it is, it's okay to scale back your plans to something a little more manageable, like just forcing yourself to get out of bed and taking a shower. That alone might be a big enough victory for the day, and maybe you'll have a bigger victory tomorrow.
Self-help tip number 2. Cultivate meaningful relationships.
Depression often makes us want to withdraw from other people and just be by ourselves. Ironically enough, spending time with other people can be one of the best things we can do to alleviate our depression.
For some reason, weekends were always tough for me. What I did was I set up a standing breakfast date with my sister for every Sunday morning. This forced me to get out of bed, shower, get dressed, and go to the cafe. There were a lot of Sundays when I really didn't want to go, but I felt like I'd be letting my sister down if I didn't show. Once I got to the restaurant and started talking with my sister, I would start feeling quite a bit better. This almost always helped to pull me out of my depression. I actually ended up with a pretty good relationship with my sister.
Self-help tip number 3. Take care of yourself.
You absolutely have to take care of yourself if you're going to overcome depression. Some of the things you can do to take care of yourself are: get plenty of sleep. You should shoot for at least 8 hours of sleep every night. This allows your body and your mind to rejuvenate themselves. Fighting depression is a serious battle, and you'll be much more effective in this battle if you get the sleep that you need. Watch out for stress. There is a definite link between stress and depression. Try to have some fun. If there's something that you used to enjoy doing, go ahead and do it anyway, even if you don't feel like it. Get some sunlight. Ideally, try to spend at least a half hour or an hour outside every day.
Self-help tip number 4. Get regular exercise.
Getting plenty of exercise may be the single most important thing that you do to treat your depression.
I didn't think exercise would work for my depression, and my doctor kept pushing me to do it, and so I finally joined a gym almost immediately. And I started to notice my mood was getting better. It was really improving. It really does work. And now exercise is one of the most important things I do to help with my depression.
Getting exercise has been shown in some studies to be as effective in treating depression as many antidepressant medications. It's interesting that depression has become a problem in our society now that we tend to not get as much exercise on our jobs as we used to.
Self-help tip number 5. Eat a healthy diet.
Making sure that you eat a healthy and nutritious diet will help you to feel better physically, and that can lead to feeling better emotionally. Foods which contain high amounts of omega-3 fats have been shown to help with avoiding and minimizing depression. Along with eating better, you may want to supplement your diet with some essential vitamins and minerals.
Eating better and taking vitamins really helps me quite a lot. I take a B complex vitamin and chromium, picolinate, and I also eat a lot more fish, which helps me get my omega-3 fats. And I'm finding that if I eat better, I feel better.
What have we learned so far? First, depression can be treated through medicine, therapy, the use of coping skills, or any combination of these three. Next, our thinking can dramatically affect the way we feel. By identifying and challenging negative thinking patterns, we can begin to feel quite a bit better. Finally, there are practical steps which you can take to cope with depression, such as reaching out to others, taking care of yourself, getting some exercise, and eating healthy foods. Depression is difficult, but by taking positive steps to help yourself, you can live a happy and functional life.
Thank you for watching this video. We hope you enjoyed it and found it useful. If you'd like more recovery and mental health videos like this one, please feel free to visit our website at www.lifeonthereal.com. And while you're there, be sure to check out our recovery blog. You can also follow us on Twitter if you'd like. Our Twitter handle is @lifeonthereal1. Until next time, be happy and healthy.